It was a quiet evening when a tall, calm man moved into a small suburban neighborhood. His truck was old but clean, filled with only a few boxes. He didn't bring much with him, just some furniture, a few bags, and an air of peace that made people look twice. He had that quiet presence that made others wonder who he was. He didn't smile much, but when he did, it was soft and polite. The house he bought had been empty for a long time. The grass had grown wild and the paint was fading on the walls. Yet within a few weeks, the place began to look different. He fixed the broken fence, cleaned the yard, and painted the house himself. Neighbors sometimes saw him working alone from early morning until the sun went down. He didn't talk much, but he always nodded and waved if someone greeted him. People in the area were curious. Some said he had come from the city to find peace. Others thought he had lost someone and wanted to start fresh. He never shared his story. He kept his head down, focused on his work, and minded his own business. He seemed disciplined in everything, his movements, his speech, even the way he walked. There was something about him that said he had seen a lot in life. A few of the older neighbors liked him right away. They said he was respectful and well-mannered. If someone's trash bin had fallen over, he would quietly pick it up. When it snowed, he shoveled not only his driveway, but sometimes the neighbors too. He didn't expect thanks or attention. That was just his nature, to help quietly and move on. But not everyone liked him. In small towns, new faces often attract gossip, especially when someone looks or lives differently. A few people made comments behind his back. They didn't like how calm he was, how little he shared. Some people can't handle peace, they mistake it for weakness. He didn't respond to gossip. He didn't argue or confront anyone. Every morning he followed the same routine: early jog, breakfast, a bit of reading, then work around the house. He lived simply. He cooked his own meals, mostly vegetables and rice. He rarely went out except for groceries or a quiet walk through the park. Once, an old woman from down the street locked herself out of her home. She called for help, and before anyone else could react, he appeared. He didn't speak much, just studied the door for a moment, found a way in without breaking anything, and opened it. The woman thanked him over and over, and he only smiled softly and said, "Be careful next time." That moment made some people realize he wasn't a bad man at all, just quiet. But still others whispered things. "He's too mysterious," one said. "Probably hiding something." Another replied, "You know, he looks like he's been in the military or something. You can tell by how he stands." And they were right, though none of them really knew. Inside his home, his life was simple but organized. His living room was neat, no fancy furniture, no television. Just a few framed photos on the wall showing nothing too personal. In a small wooden box tucked under his bed were a few medals, worn but shining. He never looked at them. He didn't need to. They were reminders of a past he had chosen to leave behind. Sometimes, late at night, he sat quietly on his porch. The street would be silent except for the sound of crickets. He'd sit there with a cup of tea watching the stars. His mind often wandered to memories of the ocean, the noise of helicopters, the smell of salt and sweat. There had been times when silence was rare, when every breath could be his last. But he had survived all that. Now he just wanted peace. He'd seen what hatred could do to the world. He'd seen what anger could destroy. That's why he stayed calm no matter what. He believed real strength wasn't about how loud you could shout or how hard you could hit. Real strength was staying steady when life tried to shake you. A few kids in the neighborhood thought he was strange. They once tried to peek through his fence thinking he might have something interesting inside. But all they saw was a small garden with vegetables and a few tools neatly lined up. There was nothing mysterious, just a man living simply. One of the local shopkeepers liked him a lot. The man visited the store once a week, always buying the same things: tea, bread, eggs, and canned soup. He never bought alcohol or cigarettes. The shopkeeper once asked, "You used to work in the military, didn't you?" He paused for a moment, then gave a small smile. "Something like that," he said quietly, and left. That short answer made the shopkeeper more curious, but he didn't ask again. Everyone could tell he wasn't the type to talk about his past. Over time, people noticed he carried himself differently. His posture was straight, his eyes sharp. When dogs barked loudly, he didn't flinch. When loud noises echoed, he didn't panic. It was like he had trained himself to stay calm in any situation. But what nobody knew was how deep his discipline ran. He had spent years learning how to survive the hardest missions on Earth. But now, all he wanted was to plant his garden and live quietly. Months passed, and he became part of the background, someone people noticed but didn't bother. But underneath that calm life, he still carried habits from his old days. Every door in his home had reinforced locks. He checked windows before sleeping. His phone had no social media, no pictures, no trace of who he once was. There was a reason for his silence. A few years back, he had lost a close friend during a mission. That loss had changed him. He had promised himself that if he ever got out alive, he'd live differently. No more fighting, no more war, just peace. So when he retired, he found this quiet town and built a small life where no one knew his name or what he had done. One afternoon, as he was fixing a wooden step on his porch, a little boy from next door walked up. "Mister," the boy said shyly, "my ball went into your yard." The man looked at him, smiled faintly, and handed it back. "Here you go." "Be careful next time, thanks," the boy said. "You're strong. My dad said you fix things fast." He chuckled quietly. "Strong hands help, but patience is stronger," he replied. The boy didn't understand, but he nodded anyway and ran off. That small exchange said everything about the man's life now. He had traded the noise of the battlefield for the quiet rhythm of small-town life. But even though he wanted peace, trouble had a way of finding people like him. At first, it started with little things, side glances, whispers, a few rude comments from people who didn't like seeing someone different. He ignored them. He had faced far worse than words. But some people mistook his silence for fear. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Still, in those early days, he hoped for the best. He believed people could change if given kindness instead of anger. So when he saw someone in need, he helped without hesitation. When he saw tension, he walked away. His goal was simple: stay out of trouble, live in peace, and rebuild his life. Every night before bed, he would write a few lines in a small notebook. Not a diary, just simple thoughts. Sometimes he wrote, "Peace is hard to keep when people love noise." Other nights, "The hardest battles are the ones fought in silence." He didn't realize that his peaceful life would soon be tested. But in those quiet first months, he believed he had finally escaped the storms of his past. The house he rebuilt wasn't just walls and paint. It was a symbol of a new beginning. And even though a few people didn't welcome him, many others did. The old woman he helped, the shopkeeper who respected his silence, and the little boy who liked to visit him sometimes, they all saw something good in him. Something steady, something rare. He didn't know it yet, but the peace he was protecting so carefully was about to be shaken. The calm before the storm had already begun. But for now, as the sun set and a soft wind moved through the trees, he sat on his porch with his tea, breathing in the quiet night. He didn't know that his strength, once used on distant battlefields, would soon be tested again, right here, in this small town, where he just wanted to live in peace. Days were peaceful at first. The man kept himself busy repairing small things around his home. He painted the back fence, planted more vegetables, and even placed a small bird feeder near his porch. Birds came every morning, and their songs filled the air. That sound made him smile, even if only for a moment. The neighborhood was still getting used to him. Some greeted him with polite nods, others avoided eye contact. A few people whispered when he walked by. He didn't care much. He had faced storms far worse than gossip. But deep inside, he noticed the shift in energy. Some people had begun to look at him differently, not with curiosity anymore, but with something colder. It started one morning when he found his trash bin kicked over. At first, he thought it was an accident, maybe a dog or the wind. He picked everything up quietly and didn't think about it again. The next day, someone had thrown a few eggs at his front gate. He cleaned it early in the morning before anyone else woke up. He didn't want to make a scene or draw attention. He believed in peace. He had learned that reacting with anger never solved anything. But peace can sometimes look like weakness to those who don't understand it. One afternoon, while he was trimming the hedges, he heard the sound of a car stopping nearby. He turned his head slightly and saw a few young men inside. They stared at him for a moment, laughing among themselves. Then the car drove off. He ignored it. He didn't know them and had no reason to care. But that wasn't the last time he saw them. Over the next few weeks, the same car passed by several times, always slowing down near his house. Sometimes they shouted, things he couldn't quite hear. Sometimes they just laughed. He didn't respond. He didn't even look up from his work. The best answer to ignorance, he thought, was silence. Still, he stayed cautious. Old habits never left him. Every night before going to sleep, he checked the locks and the windows. He wasn't afraid, just aware. Years of discipline had taught him to be alert without being anxious. The small-town sheriff once visited the street for another matter. The man nodded to him politely. The sheriff nodded back but didn't stay long. The man could tell the law here was quiet. People preferred to solve problems on their own. That was fine by him. He didn't want any trouble. A week later, he found something strange. The back fence he had repaired was broken again. This time, someone had clearly done it on purpose. The wooden boards were kicked hard, splintered at the base. He stood there for a moment, silent, studying the damage. He didn't shout. He didn't complain. He just went back inside, brought his tools, and began to fix it again. While working, he kept calm, but inside a quiet thought formed. This wasn't random. Someone was testing him. He decided to be patient. He believed that when people try to provoke you, silence hurts them more than anger ever could. So he fixed the fence and went back to his normal routine. That weekend, the weather turned warmer. Families gathered for barbecues, children played on lawns, and laughter filled the air. He stayed home, reading quietly on his porch. The sound of normal life made him feel peaceful. But in the middle of that peace, the same car appeared again. It slowed down in front of his house, and this time, one of the men inside shouted something loud and hateful before speeding off. The man didn't move. He didn't even blink. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. He had been called worse things in his life. Words no longer had power over him. Still, the moment lingered in his chest. Not as fear, but as disappointment. He had seen the world change so much, yet here, hatred still found its way. That night, he couldn't sleep easily. He walked to his porch and looked at the quiet street. The moonlight reflected off the repaired fence. The neighborhood was silent, peaceful again. He thought about his years in service and how he had fought to protect people he didn't even know. He had risked his life countless times for the idea that everyone deserved safety and freedom. And now, standing here, he wondered if those sacrifices really changed anything. But then he reminded himself, peace starts small. Even if others hated him for no reason, he wouldn't become like them. He would stay calm. That was his strength now. A few days later, one of his friendly neighbors, an older man, came by. "Hey," he said kindly. "I heard someone's been bothering you. You all right?" He smiled lightly. "I'm fine." "It's nothing," the neighbor frowned. "You sure? Folks around here can be nosy. Some don't know when to stop," he nodded. "I appreciate your concern. I'll handle it." The neighbor gave a small pat on his shoulder and left. The man appreciated that small act of kindness. It reminded him that not everyone in the world was cruel. Still, the strange events didn't stop. A few nights later, he heard something outside. He looked through the window and saw a few shadows near his fence. They were whispering and laughing. He didn't react immediately. He stood quietly in the dark, listening. After a few minutes, they ran off, leaving behind more mess. Garbage scattered, paint spilled near his gate. He waited until dawn, then cleaned everything up again. It wasn't about pride. It was about control. He refused to let anger decide his actions. The next morning, the little boy from next door noticed what happened. "Did someone make a mess again?" the boy asked, looking worried. The man smiled softly. "It's all right. I cleaned it up." "Why do they do that?" the boy asked. The man paused for a moment, then said quietly, "Sometimes people hurt others because they don't understand them. But that doesn't mean we should hate them back." The boy nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but sensing the truth in those words. After that day, the man noticed something new. A few more people in the neighborhood began to act distant. Maybe they had heard rumors. Maybe they were just afraid of getting involved. But he stayed the same. Every morning he greeted whoever passed by, and every evening he watered his plants. He wasn't going to let bitterness grow inside him. One Sunday, as he walked to the grocery store, he overheard two men talking near a parked car. One of them said in a low voice, "I don't know what that guy's hiding, but he gives me a weird feeling." He walked past them without a word, pretending not to hear. Inside, though, he felt something shift. Not anger, but sadness. He had spent years fighting for a flag that represented freedom for everyone. Now in the place he called home, some people saw him only through the color of his skin, not the content of his heart. That evening, He sat outside again, sipping his tea as the sun went down. The street was quiet, but his mind was alert. He noticed small details. The sound of the same car in the distance, the faint echo of laughter fading into the night. He didn't move. He just waited, calm as always. He wasn't afraid of danger. He had faced worse. What saddened him more was seeing how easily hate could live in ordinary hearts. He told himself he would give it one more chance. Maybe things would settle down. Maybe people would realize he meant no harm. He prayed silently for peace here, not just for himself, but for everyone. That night before sleeping, he opened his notebook again. He wrote a single line. A calm man isn't weak. He just knows when not to fight. He didn't know it yet, but the storm was only beginning. The tests ahead would push his patience, his discipline, and his faith in peace. He would soon find himself at a crossroads between who he was and who he had become. For now, he closed his notebook, turned off the light, and lay down to rest. The wind outside was gentle, the world seemed quiet again. But beneath that silence, trouble was slowly building, waiting for the right moment to strike, and when it did, they would all learn the truth about the quiet man on their street, the man they thought was just another stranger trying to fit in. The days moved slowly, but the air around his house had changed. What began as small pranks and insults had started to grow into something darker. He could feel it in the silence of the nights, in the way car headlights sometimes stopped for too long outside his home, but he still hoped it would pass. He kept telling himself that patience and kindness were stronger than hate. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the trees, he sat on his porch sipping tea. The street was quiet. Only the hum of insects filled the air. The breeze was calm, yet something in his gut felt uneasy. His instincts, sharpened by years of discipline, told him something was coming. He tried to ignore the feeling, but his body stayed alert even when his mind wanted to relax. Around midnight, a sound broke the silence, the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel. He didn't move right away. He listened carefully, eyes fixed on the window. The noise grew louder, then stopped suddenly near his gate. A whisper followed, then quiet laughter. He stood up silently and moved closer to the door, but he didn't open it. Instead, he turned off the light and watched through the thin curtains. 3 young men stood near his fence, flashlights in hand. They were whispering and giggling like they were up to something. He could see their faces in the dim light, but he didn't recognize them. They looked too confident, too careless, the kind of confidence that comes from believing you can do anything without consequence. One of them sprayed something on his fence, and the others cheered softly. He saw white paint dripping down the wood. His stomach tightened, not out of fear, but out of sadness. He stood there quietly, watching them for a few seconds longer, then stepped back. He didn't rush out or shout. He knew that reacting in anger would only make things worse. After a few minutes, the group left, laughing as they walked down the road. He waited until the sound faded completely before stepping outside. Under the soft glow of the porch light, he looked at the damage. The hateful words written across his fence were ugly and cruel, but he didn't let them take root in his heart. He turned off the light again, went inside, and sat quietly in the dark for a long time. He thought about everything he had seen in his life, places where hatred had torn people apart, places where fear ruled over kindness. And now, here he was, facing a small version of that same darkness in his own backyard. The next morning, he woke early as usual. He made his tea, changed into his work clothes, and began cleaning the fence. A few neighbors saw him while driving by, but none stopped. He didn't need help. He just wanted the ugly marks gone. Within hours, the fence looked new again, freshly painted, calm like him. But deep inside, he knew this wasn't over. Over the next few days, things got worse. Someone threw a few empty bottles near his gate at night. Once, a small firecracker exploded near his driveway. It didn't hurt anyone, but it was enough to make him realize that whoever was behind it was trying to scare him. Still, he refused to show fear. He moved through his days as if nothing had happened, calm, quiet, focused. One night, while fixing a loose light on his porch, he heard that same car engine from before. He looked up slowly and saw the same group of young men driving past, laughing loudly, the sound of their voices filled with mockery. They slowed down in front of his house for a few seconds, then sped off. He watched the car disappear into the distance. His jaw tightened, but his face stayed calm. He could have reported it to the police, but he didn't. He had learned long ago that peace sometimes means standing alone quietly. He believed that reacting would only make him like them, angry, loud, and restless. He wasn't that man anymore. The following evening, the weather changed. The sky grew heavy with clouds and a storm was coming. The air was thick and cold. He sat by the window, reading a book, when lightning flashed outside. For a moment, the entire street lit up, and in that flash he saw movement near the side of his house. He stood up slowly, his instincts fully awake now. He moved quietly toward the door, his steps silent. Through the thin curtain he saw 3 shadows near his backyard. They were whispering and moving quickly, trying not to make noise. He didn't panic. He simply turned off the light inside, took a deep breath, and waited. The sound of glass breaking echoed through the rain. He closed his eyes for a second. They had thrown something, maybe a rock, through his back window. His body reacted before his mind could catch up. Years of training had conditioned him to respond with control, not fear. He reached for a flashlight and moved toward the back of the house. The rain had started now, tapping softly against the roof. He stepped outside through the side door, quiet as the wind. He didn't shout or confront them. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. The 3 figures froze when they saw a tall silhouette appear from the shadows. The rain fell harder, and for a moment everything was still. The calm man's voice broke the silence, low, firm, but not angry. "You've done enough. Go home." Something in his tone made them hesitate. There was no threat in his words, but there was a strength that made them step back. One of them muttered something under his breath, but none of them moved forward. The man stood still, his calm gaze fixed on them. He didn't raise his hand or take a step closer, yet they began to back away slowly. The rain grew heavier, washing away the paint, the dust, and perhaps a little of their courage too. Within moments, they turned and ran toward their car. The man didn't chase them. He just watched silently as the car disappeared down the street. Then he turned around and walked back inside. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, watching the rain pour down. The water dripped through the broken glass, but he didn't fix it right away. He just watched the storm, lost in thought. By morning, the rain had stopped. The street was quiet again, the sky clear. The house was a mess. A broken window, scattered glass, and a few muddy footprints near the door. He cleaned everything himself, moving slowly and carefully. Later that afternoon, a police officer drove by, checking the area. The officer stopped and asked, "Everything all right here? Heard there was some noise last night." He nodded. "Just some kids causing trouble." "It's fine now." The officer looked around. "You sure?" "We can file a report." He shook his head. "No need. They'll stop." The officer studied him for a moment, then nodded and left. When the man went back inside, he finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. He wasn't angry, just thoughtful. He knew that violence only grows when it's fed. He wasn't going to feed it. That evening, as the sun set again, he sat on the porch sipping tea. The world looked peaceful once more, but he knew peace sometimes hides behind fragile walls. He could sense that the group wasn't done yet. They had been humiliated by his calmness, and that would bother them. Still, he refused to change his way of life. He told himself, "Let them hate if they must. I'll still choose peace." He didn't know that this quiet strength of his would soon reveal the truth about who he really was. The world around him saw just a quiet man fixing his fence and tending his garden. But deep down, beneath that calm smile and simple clothes, lived a warrior. One who had faced chaos far worse than this. One who had learned to fight battles without ever raising his voice. That night, as the street fell into silence again, he whispered to himself, "Peace isn't given. It's protected." The coming days would test that belief more than ever before. The group that thought they could scare him would return, not knowing that the man they were targeting wasn't an ordinary neighbor. They didn't know they were standing against someone who had once been among the top Navy SEALs, someone who had dedicated his life to protecting others. And soon, they would learn that true strength doesn't shout. It stands silently, waiting, watching, and ready. The morning after the rainy night was quiet. The air smelled fresh and the ground was still wet. Birds were back on the trees, singing as if nothing had happened. But the man's home showed signs of what the night had brought. The broken glass had been swept away, but the cracked window still reminded him that peace sometimes comes at a cost. He looked around and took a deep breath. Then, like always, he got to work. He replaced the broken glass, fixed the loose boards, and cleaned every corner. By noon, his house looked the same again, calm, tidy, peaceful. To anyone passing by, it was just another day. But inside, he knew the situation wasn't over. Those young men who had run away in the rain wouldn't forget how they were forced to back off. People like that often came back, driven by pride and ego. He didn't want revenge or anger. He just hoped they would stop before things went too far. For the next few days, the street stayed silent. No cars slowing down, no laughter in the night. He almost thought it was over. He continued his routine as usual. Early runs, light meals, time in the garden. The peace of those mornings made him feel grateful again. Then one afternoon, the older neighbor came by with concern on his face. "I heard some boys bragging down at the gas station," the man said quietly. "Sounded like they were talking about your house. I think they planned something again." The calm man nodded. "Thank you for telling me. I'll be ready." He didn't say more. The neighbor hesitated, then added softly, "You don't deserve this." "You've done nothing wrong." The man smiled faintly. "It's all right. Sometimes people fear what they don't understand. Time will teach them." When the neighbor left, he sat for a long time on the porch thinking. He didn't want to fight. He had promised himself years ago that he would never use his strength again for harm. But if his peace was tested again, he knew he would have to stand firm. Not with violence, but with control and presence. That night, he barely slept. He kept the porch light off and stayed near the window, listening to the sound of wind brushing against the trees. Around midnight, he heard it, the rumble of an engine stopping nearby. His heartbeat slowed instead of rising. He knew the feeling of danger too well to panic. Through the window, he saw the same car again. 4 men this time. They stepped out, whispering among themselves, holding something, maybe sticks or bottles. He watched them quietly, his eyes calm, his mind sharp. He didn't go outside right away. He wanted to see what they planned to do. They moved toward his porch, trying to stay quiet, but their nervous laughter gave them away. One of them kicked a flower pot, another tried to open his gate. That's when he stepped outside slowly without any rush. The door opened with a soft creak and the porch light flicked on. His figure appeared, calm, steady, and fearless. The men froze. None of them expected him to come out. They had thought he'd hide inside, call the police, or shout in fear, but he just stood there looking at them quietly. The silence between them felt heavy. "What do you want?" he asked in a low voice, not angry, just firm. One of them tried to speak but couldn't. Another muttered something under his breath. The calm man took a slow step forward. "You've done enough. Go home," he said again. Something about his voice and the confidence in it made them pause. It wasn't the voice of someone afraid. It was the voice of someone who had seen far worse and survived it. The tallest one tried to sound tough. "You think you can scare us?" he said, but his voice shook slightly. The man didn't reply. He just looked straight at him, his eyes steady. The silence grew stronger, and for a few seconds nobody moved. Then, without warning, the group stepped back. One of them grabbed the other's arm. "Let's go," he whispered. They hurried back to their car, pretending to laugh but clearly shaken. He watched them drive away until the sound of the engine disappeared. Then he turned off the porch light and went back inside. His heart was calm, but his mind was alert. He knew that this time, it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the kind of people they were becoming. If someone didn't stop them, they would hurt others too. The next morning, when he walked outside, he saw a police car parked nearby. The same officer from before stepped out and said, "We caught those boys driving recklessly last night. They had paint cans, bottles, and some tools in the car. Looks like they were planning something." The man nodded quietly. "I see. You sure you don't want to press charges?" the officer asked. "You'd be right to." He looked at the road for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I don't want to ruin anyone's life. They're still young. Maybe this will teach them enough." The officer studied him for a moment, clearly surprised. Most people wouldn't be that forgiving. The man smiled softly. "Forgiveness is easier than hate. Hate never ends." The officer nodded respectfully and left. Later that day, word began to spread around town. People had seen the police near his house. They started talking, first in whispers, then in open conversations. Some were curious, others worried. A few even felt guilty for having believed the rumors. That evening, 2 of his neighbors came by to check on him. "We just wanted to see if you're okay," one said. "I'm fine," he replied kindly. "Everything's all right now." They stayed for a while, talking about small things and the weather, the garden, the birds. Before leaving, one of them said, "You know, you handle things differently. You don't shout, you don't argue. It's like you already know what's going to happen." He smiled gently. "I've learned that reacting fast doesn't solve much. Sometimes calmness is the strongest answer." What they didn't know was that he wasn't just calm. He was trained for this. His whole life had been built around discipline, patience, and control. Long before this small-town life, he had served in places where fear and danger were part of every day. He had once been one of the top Navy SEALs, a man who had led missions across the world, who had seen both courage and cruelty up close, but he never spoke of it, not because he was ashamed, but because he wanted to leave that life behind. The medals and uniforms were locked away, forgotten like old memories. All he wanted now was peace, yet fate had brought this test to his doorstep. It was almost as if life was reminding him that true strength isn't about fighting wars, it's about preventing them. The following week, the story spread even more. People began to realize who he really was. The police officer had mentioned it quietly to someone, and from there the word traveled fast. Soon, the whole town knew that the quiet man living at the edge of the street wasn't just any man. He was a decorated Navy SEAL who had served his country with honor. Reactions changed overnight. People who once avoided him now waved when they saw him. Some came to apologize, others simply offered small gestures, a hello, a smile, or a kind word. But he didn't act differently. He didn't brag or correct anyone. He still lived the same simple life, tending to his garden, fixing things, and enjoying quiet evenings on the porch. One afternoon, the same young men who had caused all the trouble came to his door with their parents. They stood there awkwardly, not knowing what to say. The man opened the door, calm as always. One of them spoke first, his voice low. "We're sorry. We didn't know who you were. We just made a mistake." The man looked at them for a long moment, then said softly, "You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect. You only need to know they're human." The words hit them hard. The parents thanked him for his kindness, and the young men left quietly, their heads down. After they were gone, he sat on his porch again, sipping his tea, watching the sunset. The neighborhood was peaceful once more. The same people who had once judged him were now treating him with respect. Not because of his title, but because they had finally seen his true nature. He didn't see himself as a hero. He had done what anyone should do, choose calm over chaos, patience over anger. That night he wrote again in his notebook, "Strength is not in how loud you fight. It's in how quietly you stand when you're tested." And for the first time in a long while, he felt that his peace was real again. Not because the trouble had ended, but because he had faced it without losing himself. Days turned into weeks, and life in the small town slowly went back to normal. The air felt lighter now. The tension that once hung around like a heavy cloud had disappeared. People who used to keep their distance were now more open, more respectful. The quiet man had become a silent symbol of strength, not the kind that comes from power or rank, but from calmness and kindness. He never liked attention. Whenever someone tried to thank him or ask about his past, he would smile gently and change the topic. He preferred talking about simple things, the garden, the weather, the sunrise. To him, those were the things that really mattered now. One morning he was fixing the wooden fence when a young boy from the neighborhood walked up to him. The boy held a small notepad in his hand. "Sir, can I ask you something?" he said shyly. The man wiped his hands and smiled. "Sure, go ahead." The boy looked nervous but curious. "Everyone says you were a soldier. Is that true?" The man looked at him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes, a long time ago. Did you fight in wars?" The boy asked quietly. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, but I learned that real bravery isn't in fighting. It's in staying human, even when the world around you isn't." The boy nodded, trying to understand. "So, you're not scared of anything?" The man smiled. "Oh, I get scared too. Everyone does. The difference is how you face that fear." The boy thought about it, then smiled back. "I want to be like you when I grow up." The man gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then be kind. Be strong inside, not just outside. That's what matters." When the boy left, he stood there for a long time thinking. That small conversation reminded him why he had chosen this quiet life. He had spent years fighting wars far away, but now his mission was different: to bring peace wherever he could, even in small ways. Later that week, the town council organized a small community event at the park. They invited everyone to come together, celebrate peace, and talk about unity. The man didn't plan to go at first. He never liked crowds or attention. But when the older neighbor came by and said, "You should be there. People need to hear from someone like you," he agreed. That evening, the park was filled with lights, laughter, and music. Children ran around with balloons, families sat on benches, and everyone seemed happy. When the man arrived, many people waved to him. Some even stood up to greet him. He nodded politely and found a quiet place near the edge. After some time, the mayor of the town walked to the stage. "We've been through some difficult weeks," he said. "But in the middle of it, one man reminded us what true courage looks like. He didn't fight with anger. He stood with calmness, patience, and heart. He showed us that peace can win without violence." The crowd turned to look at the quiet man sitting under the tree. The mayor continued, "Sir, would you please join us here?" The man hesitated for a moment, but then walked to the stage. The people clapped softly, not out of excitement, but out of deep respect. The mayor handed him the microphone, but he shook his head gently. "I don't have much to say," he said. "I just want to remind everyone that strength doesn't come from what you can destroy. It comes from what you can protect. This town, these people, they're worth protecting. Not with anger, but with understanding." He looked around, his voice calm and honest. "We all make mistakes, but we can always choose to be better. That's what makes us human." When he finished, the park was silent for a moment. Then the crowd clapped, not loudly but sincerely. Some had tears in their eyes. It wasn't a big speech, but it touched everyone who heard it. After the event, people came up to him one by one, shaking his hand or just saying thank you. The same young men who had once caused him pain were there too, standing quietly near the edge of the crowd. One of them walked forward holding a small box. "Sir," he said softly, "we made this for you. It's just something small, to say sorry again." The man opened the box and saw a small wooden carving of a dove, a symbol of peace. He smiled warmly and nodded. "Thank you. This means more than you know." From that day, things truly changed. The young men started helping around the neighborhood, painting fences, cleaning parks, helping older folks with groceries. They were trying to fix what they had broken, not just with words, but with actions. The man never treated them differently. He spoke to them kindly, taught them how to build, how to repair, and sometimes even how to stay calm in hard situations. One afternoon, one of them said, "We didn't understand you before. We thought you were weak because you stayed quiet." The man smiled. "Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the loudest answer." As months passed, the seasons changed. The town became more peaceful than it had ever been. People started coming together more often. There was a new sense of unity. It was as if the man's calm energy had slowly spread through everyone. One cool autumn morning, the man walked to the small hill outside town, his favorite spot to watch the sunrise. The golden light spread across the valley, touching every rooftop, every tree. He sat there with his notebook and began to write again. Peace isn't something you find by running away from the world. It's something you create, one act of kindness at a time. As he wrote, a familiar sound of footsteps came from behind. It was the same boy who had spoken to him weeks ago. "You come here a lot," the boy said, sitting beside him. "It's quiet here," the man replied. "You can think clearly when the world is still." The boy nodded. "Do you miss being a soldier?" He looked at the sunrise for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes, but I think I'm serving in a different way now, helping people find peace, and that's also a kind of mission." The boy smiled. "Then you're still a hero," the man chuckled softly. "No, heroes are people who keep trying to do the right thing even when no one notices." They sat there in silence for a while, watching the light spread across the town. The moment felt simple, but it meant everything. That evening, the man received a letter in the mail. It was from an old comrade, someone he had served with years ago. The letter spoke of their past missions, of the bonds they shared, and of how proud they were to know he had found peace. At the end,